In this section, we'll discuss some of the early challenges faced by the United States now as a new nation, and those challenges are going to really highlight the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. And one of those weaknesses is the fact that this new national government was not able to really build a unified army. It didn't have an army of its own. And so Britain realized that. And because of that, Britain did not really follow through on the terms of the Treaty of Paris. And a lot of those forts along the western frontier, along the Great Lakes in the Northwest region, which belonged to Britain, were supposed to be turned over to the US. And they didn't give up those forts along the Great Lakes. And those forts were important because the Americans needed those forts to be able to protect their land and fur trade routes along that region. They also closed off the ports to American ships, and it was very difficult now for merchants to be able to trade their goods that they used those British ports to be able to do so. So high tariffs were placed on American goods now, and American goods became more expensive to buy here in the States, and the economy here in the United States began to suffer. Prices of goods began to increase, and so economic conditions began to worsen here in the country. Now, Spain also proved to be a problem. In 1784, the Spanish officials closed the Mississippi River to U.S. shipping, which was also extremely vital to the way that we traded. The farmers depended on the Mississippi along the west to be able to trade their goods. Congress couldn't really settle on an agreement in order to negotiate with Spain, and because of that, Spain left negotiations and the ports remained closed. So people then began to criticize the weakness of the national government. Not only could they not enforce our treaties with Britain, they also began to see that the national government couldn't really come together and work together to be able to negotiate with Spain, and the weaknesses of the articles were really starting to become evident as we progressed and saw these new challenges here in the country. So now that we had these closed markets, now that our trade was restricted, this is really going to have a huge impact in the country, right? In the British West Indies, where American merchants were able to trade their goods, could no longer do that. And so exports, things that we exported out of the country here, those things dropped, and it became very expensive to buy American goods. And so instead, British goods came into the country freely and cheaply, and so people began to buy British goods instead of American goods because they were way more affordable. The Confederation Congress, because of the way that the articles were set up, really had no authority to be able to pass taxes. They couldn't order states to be able to pass taxes to help correct the unequal trade with Britain. And the states really had no unity to be able to trade with each other. And so really states worked independently to increase their own trade, right? Instead of improving the trade of the country as a whole, states were out for themselves. And if they could arrange a treaty with a different country, then they would do so. If they could do an arrangement with Britain, if they could do an arrangement with Spain on their own, then they would do so, right? Or if it became too difficult for Britain to trade with one state, then they would just move on to the next. So really, states were acting independently and not really as a unified country. American merchants then were forced to look for new markets. They could no longer depend on the British markets, which were their main markets of trade in the Caribbean. So they ended up having to look for new markets in places like China, in France, the Netherlands. These became new markets that they had to rely on. But what we see here is that these closed markets and the way that the economy is going in the United States, it's really decreasing very rapidly. And this is really bringing then the people together to realize that something needs to be done with the way that the government was set up, or else the nation was not going to survive.